Live from the world headquarters of RT America in our nation's capital, this is the news with Rick Sanchez.
Hi, everybody. I'm Rick Sanchez, and I want to welcome all of you who are watching from all over the world, including those of you who are watching on your phones on the portable TV app. There are two, count them, two big pieces of news that are happening as we speak. Now, why in the world the U.S. media in general is ignoring these stories, it's kind of tough to reconcile. This weekend, China made it official. It is moving forward, indeed, with a $400 billion deal with Iran. What's the deal? Well, it goes something like this. China will pump $400 billion into the flailing Iranian economy. And for the next 25 years, Iran will pump a steady stream of oil into the Chinese economy. That's the deal. Why is China doing a deal with Iran? Because it is making good, it says, on its promise to Iran based on the nuclear agreement both countries signed back in 2015. You remember that? Yeah, it's the same deal that the United States backed out of. President Biden now says he wants a new deal with Iran, but China is telling Mr. Biden, no, you can't sign a treaty and then back out and start over again. You have to honor your commitment, sir. So even if you won't, we will. That's China's talking point. That's their perspective for why they're doing this, right? So the United States' perspective seems to be that China is becoming obstinate and dangerous and may need to be put in its place. So here's what the United States is going to be doing. The U.S. is announcing war games. Here's some of the video or some of the pictures or images of these said war games that the United States has from time to time. It'll carry out these war games this summer to try and prepare for the eventuality of a war with China, while also having to fight, possibly at the same time, other countries around the world, including Russia. The Pentagon says these war games or military exercises are being designed to equip the U.S. military's top leaders on how to react to a fictional global crisis erupting on multiple fronts and how to move all the military pieces around, like the bombers and the aircraft carriers. But you know, there's something else here that at least I noted this as I was doing my research on this assignment, that there's something else in this report that kind of caught my eye as we look at these images of these war games. And maybe it's going to raise questions for you as well. The Pentagon also notes that these military exercises you see behind me are going to be used to set the future military budget of the United States. Ask yourself this question. Do you think when all is said and done after these war games, they will ask for less? Maybe, in fact, a better question is, have they ever asked for less? Let's get into this here on the News with Rick Sanchez, where we always say and truly believe it's time to do news again, by golly. All right, we wonder what you ponder as you watch this newscast. We design it that way, by the way. So here's what we think you will be pondering. How will China respond to the U.S. military's war games that seem to be aimed at them? New York announces plans for an unofficial vaccine passport. Will it work? And how much of what you put on Instagram is shared publicly? Care to guess? All right, let's start with China. It appears ready to deal, and the country seems most interested in dealing with is Iran. In fact, the more the United States pushes against Iran, the more China appears interested in getting nearer to Iran. The irony is not lost on U.S. officials who may be taking it as a direct assault on them. Is that, in fact, why the U.S. is now announcing war games that tend to be focused more on China? Joining us now, NRS correspondent Farron Franzak with a whole lot to report on these developing stories. Okay, let's start with these so-called war games or military exercises or whatever we want to brand them. Forget the nomenclature. What are they really all about?
Right, so to break it down in the simplest of terms, basically you're going to have the U.S. military logging onto their laptops, logging onto their computers, and going over thousands upon thousands of different scenarios, almost like a cyber game of Battleship, where if this happens, where are we going to move these carriers, that carriers, what have you. To also kind of compare it, it's like kind of a messy, bad divorce. You have the husband with all of his friends and his family gathering around him, the wife, her friends and family gathering around her, the attorneys kind of going at it, or, you know, we demand this, who's going to settle first? It's kind of a game like that. But we're seeing now more where it's not only actions, also words. Because mind you, the U.S. does this all the time. The U.S. always is moving around battleships and stuff like that. This has always kind of been an ongoing thing. Again, now we just have war of the words as well behind it. Yeah,
it's almost about, they do it all the time, but they do it with a purpose and sometimes with a target in mind. And the target in this case appears to be China. So let's talk about that a little bit. There seems to be a growing antagonism, at least the trend is such, in recent months, even during the Biden administration or its onset, between the United States and China, which this seems to have led to, correct?
Right. So we have the first meeting a couple of weeks ago between the U.S. and China out in Alaska. You had Secretary Antony Blinken coming in saying, hey, we're the U.S., we're strong, this is how we're going to do it, this is how you're going to comply, this is how it's going to be. And China has always been very diplomatic at these meetings. Not so much anymore, Rick. Take a listen.
We thought that the U.S. would follow basic diplomatic protocol. We should clarify our position immediately. Let me tell you something. You have no right to tell China that you start from a position of strength when talking to us. It is a failure to use various means to topple the so-called authoritarian states. The challenges in the United States facing human rights are deep-seated. They did not just emerge over the past 4 years, such as Black Lives Matter. It did not come up recently. So we do hope for our two countries, it's important that we manage our respective affairs well, instead of deflecting the blame on somebody else in this world.
You know, it's interesting that I heard him essentially assail the United States for its human rights record after the United States assailed China for its human rights record. It's talking directly about the Uyghur situation in China, something that it seems the U.S. media has been, a bandwagon the U.S. media has been jumping on. They're kind of, the U.S. media seems to be cheerleading the U.S. antagonism toward China, correct?
Right, and you know, Rick, every country has their own media with their own cheerleaders. The problem is, though, is that over the weekend, we had one of our competitors, they actually spoke to the Chinese ambassador about the situation with the Uyghurs. Again, the Chinese leaders have always kind of been very diplomatic, but here again, now you have Chinese cheerleaders calling out the U.S. cheerleaders.
Now, this is Christian Amanpour, a legendary reporter who covered the Gulf War and every other war the United States has ever been in, right? And she's interviewing this ambassador from China.
Right, and his response might be a little bit surprising. Take a listen.
I remember all these things happened over the years. For instance, in maybe more than a dozen years ago in Iraq, a few years ago in Syria, in Libya. I still remember you reporting the Iraqi war some years ago. So can people come out and repeat these same stories to the world? No, because many of the stories were just based on falsehood, were just fabrication.
So it's interesting. He's telling Christian Amanpour, you're telling me you've done investigations into our human rights record, but I've known that you've reported in the past and they've been falsehoods.
Right.
And she was pointing directly at the Iraq debacle.
Exactly. And we have to mention, we're still there. The United States is still there in those parts. So again, pot calling the kettle black here. So it's going to be very interesting to see what happens with this. But again, war of the battle and war of the words.
That's amazing to have a Chinese official tell a U.S. journalist, you want me to take whatever you report at face value, but you've lied and created falsehoods and fabrications in the past, and we think you're doing it again with us. Wow.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Good stuff, Farron. Appreciate it. Meanwhile, the leaders of three of the world's most important countries are meeting on this day to work out the best way of dealing with many issues, including Ukraine. There's a joint video conference that's going to involve Russian President Vladimir Putin, German Chancellor Angela Merkel, and French President Emmanuel Macron. Here are several reports that we've put together. We begin with RT correspondent Alex Mihailovich.
It's an effort to get things on track between Russia and two other European powerhouses. Moscow is working on coordinating a video conference between Russian President Vladimir Putin, German Chancellor Angela Merkel, and French President Emmanuel Macron. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov told reporters, "We continue coordination with Berlin and Paris. When there are specific results, we will inform you." Among the topics to be discussed is the situation in Ukraine. According to observers from the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, in recent days there have been hundreds of ceasefire violations in the fight between Ukrainian forces and rebel forces in that country. And there is a fear that battles will intensify if the trend continues. With this issue at top of mind, some are wondering why Ukraine has not been included in the talks between France, Germany, and Russia. According to the Kremlin spokesperson, there are many other issues for discussion. This is not the Normandy 4. Of course, the issue will be on the agenda in one way or another, but this is not the only issue. The Normandy 4 contact group includes Germany, France, Russia, and Ukraine. According to Ukraine's chief negotiator, a summit between the four nations could happen in April, with the aim of finally resolving the war in Donbass. It is not clear what the other topics will be if the proposed video conference between France, Germany, and Russia happens, but many believe sanctions imposed on Russia by the European Union and the U.S. earlier this month will also be on the agenda. The sanctions are connected to Russian opposition figure Alexei Navalny and are regarded as interference into Russia's internal affairs by Moscow. While right now little is known about the proposed video conference, according to the Kremlin, the public will be informed when a time is locked down and the agenda is clear. For RT, I'm Alex Mihailovich.
Joining us now is former British Member of Parliament George Galloway. George, help the world, our viewers all over the world, try to understand in some terms that maybe we can find it somewhat understandable, the situation in Ukraine and why the United States and the French and the Brits and the Germans are all having meetings about this country. What is it?
Well, there was a coup in the Ukraine, and the pro-Russian president was forced to flee at gunpoint. The parliament was burned to the ground. The presidential palace was trashed, and the language, Russian language, was struck from the official register, immediately leading to a feeling amongst the 1/3 of all Ukrainian people who are in fact Russian and for whom Russian was their mother tongue, immediately felt that this coup was aimed at them. And in the eastern part of Ukraine, which borders Russia, these people decided to take up arms to defend themselves. And it was just as well that they did, because they were very quickly assailed by extreme Ukrainian nationalists who really don't want any Russian spoken, who really don't want any Russian nationals there. So the possibility of a flashpoint is obvious. And when the people of Crimea decided to return to the Russian motherland, they'd only ever been separated in the days of the USSR, and Russia built a bridge connecting the motherland to the Crimea, where most of Russia's naval hardware is. The scene was set for a standoff, and mischievous hands have been seeking to try and set the two parties against each other in a hot war ever since. So it's hardly surprising that the two important Western European powers, Germany and France, should want to talk to Russia about that. But as Peskov said, there are many other issues that will be discussed in this video conference, Rick.
countries all over the world have issues amongst their populace. There are civil wars. We had one here in this country, as a matter of fact. Is it the concern in Ukraine in particular that the decision as to the outcome of what happens in the future of that country will not be up to the people of that country, but rather so many other countries who seem to want to, dare I use the word, interfere?
Well, that's exactly it. The NATO borders have been moved to Russia's border in contradiction to the assurances given by President Reagan to Mr. Gorbachev back in the day. And Russia feels that some would like the Ukrainian domino to fall into the Western ambit, bringing the West ever closer to Russia's border and Russia's vital interests. People are using the Ukrainians, in my view, as an anti-Russian cat's paw. And that's very dangerous, not least for the people of Ukraine, who would be the cat's paw right at the front line.
What is Germany's interest and what is France's interest directly? Are they just trying to be peacemakers, or do they have another concern?
Well, we all have a great and bitter memory of war in Europe. And, of course, Germany invaded France 3 times in 100 years. So nobody wants war anywhere in Europe because wars can spread. Of course, the Germans want to talk about the Nord Stream project and other things too. The vaccine, Sputnik 5, which Germany is more or less now openly arguing to bring the Russian vaccine into Europe to try and solve the COVID catastrophe that is now raging in Western Europe. Hardly anyone in Western Europe's had any vaccine at all. It's a complete shambles.
Wow.
But the Ukraine will loom large, no doubt, in the discussions. And that's because nobody in Europe wants war in Europe. It's easy to want war in Europe when you're thousands of miles away.
George Galloway, as usual, with a great explanation of a situation that the world tussles with and is, quite frankly, somewhat confusing at times, if not perplexing. Thank you, my friend. By the way, there's some breaking news that we're going to report to you, and this is actually great news for the global economy. You know that tanker that's been blocking one of the world's most vital trade arteries? Well, the tanker has been wrestled free from the shores. It has been essentially set free, which means it can now navigate, and so can others. Salvage workers have been working for 6 days on land and sea, and finally were able to get the job done using a lot of heavy equipment and technology and strategy. But most of all, the reason the ship or the tanker is now free is the moon and the tides. The moon and the tides, nature, which created deeper waters to be able to float the boat. We'll be back. New York Governor Andrew Cuomo has announced the launch of a brand new app working as a COVID vaccine passport, so to speak. The passport at this point is completely voluntary. It's a way to show that you have received the vaccine, which would then ostensibly allow you access to, theaters and gyms and other events where people are able to congregate. Israel's been using a system very similar to this, and it's been met with great success. But how is this going to be able to work in New York City? Reporting from New York, here is RT correspondent Trinity Chavez.
The nation's first vaccine passport is rolling out across New York. It's called the Excelsior Pass. The app will allow New Yorkers to prove their vaccination status or recent COVID-19 testing history, a move that could be key to getting back to some kind of normalcy. Similar to a mobile airline boarding pass, individuals will now be able to either print out their pass or store it on their smartphones using the Excelsior Pass wallet app. Each pass will have a QR code, which participating businesses and venues can scan using a companion app to verify proof of COVID-19 negative test results or proof of vaccination. And while officials say all information and data stored on the app would be kept confidential, there are still some privacy concerns. Meantime, the app won't show any additional health information when scanned, but it will show a green check mark if the person has been vaccinated or tested negative, or a red X if they don't have it. Major venues, including Madison Square Garden, will begin using the app on April 2nd, and then will expand to smaller arts, entertainment, and event venues. Now, the Excelsior Pass app rollout comes at a time when vaccine programs are underway around the world. The European Union is planning to issue electronic passes allowing for travel this summer, and Israel, with the highest vaccination rate in the world, has already handed out green passes allowing travel and access to events. But all those who are concerned about privacy issues about downloading an app, well, the so-called vaccine passport here in New York is not a requirement, just something state officials think will make things easier. Reporting in New York, Trinity Chavez, RT.
You know, every time you scroll, you like, or you share a picture on Instagram, how much of your personal data are you actually, with your phone putting out into the world? The answer, 79%. 79% of whatever you put on Instagram is going to be shared with, for example, companies who will then use it to maybe sell your stuff. Fact is, your personal data is really not so personal. Not at all. Not anymore. Here's RT correspondent John Huddy.
It's no surprise that Instagram, like Twitter, Facebook, and basically most other popular social media apps and platforms, collects and shares your personal information. Well, now we're learning a little more about how much of that information is being shared, at least by Instagram anyway. According to the website Statista, Instagram is most likely to share your personal information with third parties for advertising purposes. The popular app shares data from 11 out of 14 categories with third parties, putting it ahead of Facebook, which increasingly shares fewer data with external advertisers. Now, Statista based its report off information garnered from the secure cloud provider named pCloud. pCloud, like Statista, found that Instagram was among one of the most invasive apps for sharing users' information, along with Facebook, LinkedIn, and even Uber Eats. But in fairness to Instagram, the app makes no secret about the information it's sharing, explaining on its data policy page, quote, "We use the information we have to deliver our products, including to personalize features and content, including your news feed, Instagram stories and ads, and make suggestions for you, such as groups or events you may be interested in, or topics you may want to follow on and off our products." pCloud reports that 52% of apps, in fact, share your data with third parties, and for various reasons, such as making the experience better, tracking your interactions, and hitting you up with ads. So, social media users beware. If you don't want your information being shared, well, don't use the apps. For RT, John Huddy.
If you don't want your information shared, don't use the apps. In other words, this is just the reality of social media. Joining us now to talk about this, cybersecurity risk analyst and president of Dark Intel, Todd Shipley. I'll tell you what, Todd, it's kind of a grim picture. 79% of whatever you put on Instagram becomes public. You think people know that?
Well, I think people should. I mean, this is not something that's new. I mean, Facebook kind of hides it in the number 2 spot, but don't forget, they own Instagram. So this is still all the kinds of fallout that we're seeing from, the Cambridge Analytica story from a few years ago. Facebook is still selling everybody's data. They're collecting it and, selling it to the highest bidder.
What do you say to people out there who may be listening to the sound of your voice right now and thinking, you know what? That ship has sailed. Forget about it. I mean, there's no way we can I know everybody knows where I am and who I'm talking to and what I'm saying. Just let it go. That's just a new normal. What do you say to those folks?
Well, there's some sense in that, because it's hard to do any of these things through social media and not accept the terms of agreement. If you don't want to do that particular social media, then you don't sign the terms of agreement and you don't do it. But we can't exist in today's world without having those things. So they've got us between a rock and a hard place. I think the only thing that's going to change is some kind of legislation that protects private data. But of course, these big social media companies are going to fight any kind of restriction on their use of the data, because that's how they make all their money, selling it to marketers and putting products in front of you that are selected just for you based on your browsing history.
Why is it dangerous? What is the problem with this happening? looking at it from the other way.
Well, I mean, well, the danger is, hugely that somebody has a lot of information about, Rick Sanchez and Todd Shipley stored on a computer someplace, and they know more about us than we do. And so this data is being stored someplace and can be accessed by foreign actors, against the United States, hackers that want that data for some reason. They're trying to put some kind of scam together to, target you or a business person. There's a huge amount of problems with this amount of data being stored by people that you don't control, and you have no ability to get rid of the data that they control.
Wow. Todd Shipley, great explanation, taking us through this new revelation about Instagram having 79% of all the information they gather on you, and they sell it or use it or give it away. It ain't yours. Ha! Todd Shipley with the explanation. And that is our news. We want to thank you so much for being with us. We're going to keep coming at it throughout the day. I'm Rick Sanchez. And remember, tell your friends we're here. See you then.